A Shalom Akim, Shalom, Shalom, giving all praises, glory, and honor to Yahweh, Ba'ashem Yahabushai, Ba'ashem Rakakwadash. Double honors to the apostles and the elders, great millstone, for teaching us his truth, and salutations to the sincere Akim and Aquath who may listen. May the blessing of election be upon your house. My name is Raquai. I'm back in here with another quick and Lord's will, as always, an edifying lesson. And for today's lesson, I wanted to go through a style of sacrifice known as peace offerings and how beneficial your sacrifice can benefit brethren. So I guess I'll start off by going through what is a peace offering. So basically, during the Levitical priesthood, you had different kinds of sacrifices that were being performed, right? So you had burnt offerings, you had guilt offerings, you had peace offerings, sin offerings, so on and so forth. Nevertheless, one of the particular sacrifices I thought was very interesting that I wanted to focus on today was peace offerings, right? So I guess I'll start off just by Googling it, in the on Google here. And it says peace offering, and I'll get into it a little bit. It says here, peace offering is a goodness, I can never say this word, propitiatory or conciliatory gift. It says in biblical use, an offering presented as a thanksgiving to the Most High, right? So what does propitiatory mean? Let me go to that word here. So propitiatory, it says intended to win or regain the favor of a god, spirit, or a person by doing something that pleases them, right? So that's very very loud, right? That's a definition that stands out, right? Because the scriptures talk about how to seek righteousness and seek meekness, because we know, as Paul said, you were as Gentiles being led away by dumb idols. So there was a lot of things in the worldly sense that we did things that were very, very displeasing in the eyes of the Heavenly Father, right? So, coming back to our understanding, identity, we're looking to do things that are going to win us favor with Yahweh Ba'ashem Yahabushai, right? So, so peace offering, let me go back to that, right? Let me see if there was a little bit more. It says lower down, it says something offered to an adversary in hope of obtaining peace, right? So essentially, it's basically a propitiatory or a conciliatory gift. So essentially a gift to be able to make peace with our power, right? So let me get into, into Levitical priesthood, when the ins and outs of this kind of sacrifice, right? And I sincerely pray and hope that this lesson is edifying, right? I'm kind of just equating and examining this type of sacrifice and how understanding that our own sacrifices, which I will get into later on, is also beneficial to the brethren, beneficial to the body, right? So not to essentially undermine your importance, within the body, but also recognizing that your sacrifice, is indeed important as well, right? So I want to get into the actual physical aspect of this peace offering. So this is Leviticus chapter 7. I'll read a little bit of this here, but the point I kind of want to really just touch upon is really in lower down in verse 29, right? So this is Leviticus chapter 7, verse 11, and it says here that this is the law of sacrifice of peace offerings, which ye shall offer unto the Lord Yahweh. And ye shall offer it for a thanksgiving. Then he shall offer with the sacrifice of thanksgiving unleavened cakes mingled with oil, and unleavened wafers anointed with oil, and cakes mingled with oil, and of fine flour fried. Besides the cakes, he shall offer of this offering unleavened bread with the sacrifice of thanksgiving of his peace offerings, right? So, this is a portion that was done, but I want to also touch on where it says thanksgiving. So, what was very interesting, I thought, let's go to that word in the Hebrew where it says thanksgiving here, right? Not to confused with this holiday that is done, here in the West. But the Thanksgiving word here in the Hebrew, it says thawada, right? So like when somebody does something, a person says thank you, right? Normally in Hebrew we say thawada or thawada, what I'm saying? So this is H8426 thawada. It says properly an extension of the hand. It says adoration. It says confession, praise, thanks. Lower down it says here confession, praise, thanksgiving, give praise to the Most High, thanksgiving in songs or liturgical worship, thanksgiving, sacrifice of thanksgiving, confession. So essentially, an expression of thanks, right? Gratitude, so on and so forth, right? So what I really wanted to touch on is lower down what's very interesting about this particular sacrifice, right? So I'll read this here in verse 29, because there were others. There were other Israelites that would benefit from this particular sacrifice here. So this is what I really, really wanted to touch on, right? So this is Leviticus chapter 7, verse 29, and it says here, "Speak unto the children of Israel, saying, He that offereth the sacrifice of his peace offerings unto the Lord Yahweh shall bring his oblation unto the Lord of the sacrifice of his peace offerings. His own hands shall bring the offerings of the Lord made by fire, the fat of the breast, with the breast, it shall he bring, that the breast may be waved for a wave offering before the Lord. And the priest shall burn the fat upon the altar, but the breast shall be Aaron's and his sons," right? So they would give the fat and put the fat upon the altar, right? And that would be unto like a sweet smelling savor unto the Lord, right? But you would the breast portion, and I was going to continue on here in verse 32, and it says, "But the breast shall be Aaron and his sons, and the right shoulder shall ye give unto the priest for a heave offering of the sacrifices of your peace offerings," right? So this particular portion, you have the breast and you have the right shoulder, you would give unto the sons of Aaron and his sons, right? And it says here, verse 33, "He among the sons of Aaron, he that offereth the blood of the peace offerings and the fat shall have the right shoulder of his part," right? So I'm reading this let me read this as well. I shall read verse 35, and it says, "This is the portion of the anointing of Aaron and the anointing of his sons out of the offerings of the Lord made by fire, in the day when he presented them to minister unto the Lord in the priest's office." So okay, you might be wondering, okay, Require, what does this mean? What can I get from this? With this particular sacrifice here, there were portions of it which benefited Aaron and his sons. Keep this in mind, and I'm reading this also to bring an understanding that the priests, the priests were responsible for having a duty in performing the Lord's work and performing the priestly duties and executing the priest's office, doing particular sacrifices, burning incense, and so on and so forth. This was a very, I guess you could say, it's a very laborious type of job. And keep this in mind as well. During this time, you didn't have, the different tribes had received their own allotments. There were different physical portions of, the land, right? As opposed to the tribe of Levi. The Levi, they didn't receive that physical allotment, in regards to the in regards to the promised land. They didn't really have that physical, area allotted to them. Yeah, I think there was only physical. They had like towns and cities, they would sojourn in, but other than that, this was this particular tribe didn't receive that, right? So, to kind of bring everything and all in perspective, us, there are certain, because we know that we don't actually perform these kind of sacrifices. However, the principles are still the same, where our sacrifice, knowing, pursuant to Romans the 12th chapter, as a matter of fact, I'll get that. We understand that now, okay, we are the sacrifice, right? And there are going to be certain situations that you might be in where, okay, certain brethren, can benefit from your particular sacrifice, whether you might have some substance, like some physical substance, or you might have a gift that brothers can actually benefit from, and sisters who may listen, they can benefit from, right? Because it's a body, right? It's not a competition, right? Different brothers are, have different gifts, right? Spiritual gifts, right? And that's something that Paul, strongly, goes into. But the point is that in we are the sacrifice now, and how much more that when the priests, they did not have that physical allotment, because the different 11 tribes, they would bring, whether it was like their grains or their first fruits and so on and so forth. Those were things that were given to the priests because they didn't have that substance, right? So just like back then, you know they didn't have that substance. There might be certain situations that you might be in when a brother may not have certain things or whatever, right? You might have more understanding in regards to a certain topic. You might have certain physical resources, right? Or you might have, or something as simple as like, you might just lend an ear, for example, right? Those sorts of things, you can give that, and that can benefit, the brethren, right? Because the scriptures talk about when you're converted to strengthen, thy brethren. I'm making a very long-winded point, but I sincerely hope it all pieces together. But let me get this understanding cleared up in regards to us being that sacrifice. This is Romans chapter 12. Verse 1, and it says here, I beseech you, brethren, therefore, by the mercies of the Most High, Yahweh Bashem Shai, that ye present your bodies a living sacrifice, holy and acceptable unto the Most High, which is your reasonable service. And be not conformed to this world, but be ye transformed by the renewing of your mind, that ye may prove what is good and acceptable and the perfect, and perfect will of the Most High, right? So we're not conformed into the manners and the behaviors of this world, because when you think about the behaviors of this world, especially in Babylon the Great, their mentality is they have a mentality of a dog eat dog sort of mentality, trying to push and scheme and climb and deceive one another in order to get what they want. And essentially, and unfortunately, I should say, because our people have been seduced by the ways of the wicked, right? As the scriptures say that the righteous is more excellency than his neighbor, but the ways of wicked seduceth them. Our people have been seduced into this particular ways, in thinking that they tend to disregard the welfare of their own kin and take on the ways of Esau in order to actually gain a buck, or to gain his wife or another man's property, and so on and so forth. They don't have the mindset to actually please the Lord, but actually keeping his ways, because the scriptures say that his laws are not grievous, right? So there are certain things that you can do, right? But let me read a little bit. There was something else I wanted to. Let me just jump down to verse 6 here. This is Romans 12, verse 6. And it says, then having gifts differing according to the grace that is given to us, whether prophecy, let us prophesy according to the proportion of faith, or ministry, let us wait into our ministering. So when you go into that word minister, I believe it means to serve, right? So let's go here. Wait, hold on. Minister. Just bear with me. Okay, so minister, so it says a man consecrated to the service of the Christian church. Right, we know that the real original Christians were Israelites. They were first called Christians in Antioch. Right, just to clear that up. It says a servant, valet, member of a household, minister. It says a servant, a priest, assistant, right? It also says priest in the Latin, right? Let's see, subordinate, right? So essentially, it's a mindset of servitude, right? Okay, let me continue on. Verse 7, it says, or ministry, let us wait in our ministering, that he that teacheth on teaching, and he that exhorteth on exhortation, right? So there are certain things that you might be actually, you might have a knack for, you're able to actually use this particular gift to be able to actually benefit the brethren, benefit the body, right? It's not a competition, it's not a comparison, right? And the moment you start thinking like that, you're leaving an invitation for Satan to get in, right? So there are certain, brethren that have different talents and have different gifts that are able to actually benefit the body in where other brothers may not be actually I don't want to say weaken, but that's probably just not their strong suit, but there's room for development. But the point is the ability to actually use the gift or use the resources, just like how the 11 tribes, they were taking their own physical resources back then, and they were using it to not only to win favor with the Most High, but it was also to benefit the priest, those particular sons of Aaron, right? Because they were performing a mighty work, right? They didn't actually have that, it's saying, like, imagine you have a vineyard and you're holding on to all the resources. That doesn't make any sense. It doesn't make any sense to hold on to all these resources and you don't actually do anything with it, right? The scriptures say that wisdom that is hoarded and treasure that is hoarded up, what profit is in them both, right? There is no profit, right? And that's what makes Esau a terrible person to rule, right? Because he's a niggard in his true nature. But not to get on him, but just to more just to show the importance of our own sacrifice and how our own sacrifice can benefit the body. So let me continue on. I'll read verse 8 again. And it says here that he that exhorteth on exhortation, he that giveth, let him do it with simplicity. He that ruleth with diligence, he that showeth mercy with cheerfulness, and let love without dissimulation arbor that which is evil, and cleave unto that which is good. So we're actually learning the understanding of actually how to actually be, that type of affection for one another, because in the world we don't, when you think about our people's behavior, especially like Israelite men towards one another, they don't have that, because they've really, they have that essentially, like, as the curses say, they have that evil eye towards one another. They don't have that they don't have that type of love that what I'm saying. They don't have that type of camaraderie, between the tribes, right? Like when you think about the story, for example, just use this story as an example. When you think about the type of bond that was between David and his friend Jonathan, Saul's son, that type of affection. They don't, our people don't have that in the world, right? If Yahushua is not in the midst, they don't have that type of, you know that type of camaraderie for each other, right? They like to, they're just man, if Yahushua is not in the midst, they can't come together. That's really the point. And the scriptures talk about how it's so beneficial for brothers to dwell essentially in unity, right? And that's something that Esau really and truly is afraid of, right? Um so not to go too off topic, but still staying on the point of sacrifice. Let me get this here. This is Ephesians 5:1, and it says, Be ye therefore followers of the Most High, Yahweh Bashem Yahushai, as dear children, and walk in love as a Mashiach also hath loved us, and hath given himself for us as an offering, a sacrifice to the Most High for a sweet smelling savor. But fornication and uncleanness, covetousness, let not be named among you, as becoming as saints, right? Because that's a lot of a lot of those mentalities of what you get is in the world, right? They have more of a greed type of spirit, because look who's ruling. That's the type of people who rule. So no, so it's not surprising when you see that behavior trickles down onto the people. You know what I'm saying? So, and the scriptures talk about that. It says, as is the king, so are his officers. So it's no surprise that the people are going to behave that way when you see the people above behaving that way, because Esau is really and truly a niggard, and in his true nature, right? So but in our culture, it was always showing a sentiment of when you go into some of these different laws, right? Like, for example, when you have laws such as gleaning grapes, it was always when you look at the laws in its core nature, it was always about consideration. So, for example, being considerate, like, for example, like if you were an Israelite back then and you had like a vineyard, you had pomegranates, you had fig trees, you had, you just name it all, right? You had all this abundance, right? What you would do, for example, if you had a vineyard, you wouldn't glean all the portions, the entire vineyard. What the thing you would do in keeping the law, you would leave a certain portion, put aside, right? So, for example, people who are Israelites that might be sojourning in the land, you had situations like orphans, or you had situations like women that lost their husbands, for example. Like, say they lost a husband in a war, right? In those situations, they would have some food set aside to eat in the event, to be able to feed those people who are essentially less fortunate. You know what I'm saying? So it was always about consideration about those that had, less than you. And that was one of the biggest points that you really see when you go through these particular customs, these different kinds of sacrifices, always to keep in mind about those who actually had less than you, right? A sentiment of consideration. And that is something that is very lost in this world. You don't really see a lot of that, right? It's more of, a me sort of mentality, right? But I guess I'll just leave it there. But I kind of made a far out point, but I sincerely pray and hope that this lesson, really was edifying. Just like to give all praises, glory, and honor to Yahweh Bashem Yahushai. Until next time, I say Shalom.